I wasn't looking for a film project. I was looking for a large project, and I thought it would be an oratorio or an opera or a multimedia piece. Frankly, the last thing I was looking for was a film project because I had done 16 feature films by that time, and I really was interested in doing something that was for the stage more than more than another film project. I was interested in doing a piece about religion, not a religious piece, but a piece of music which topic was religion. And so what I did was I was researching all sorts of different areas, and I finally decided that I wanted to do something that was based on a Catholic subject. And the question was what? So my friend Galen Brandt had suggested Joan of Arc to me as a topic, and I thought that was the worst idea I'd ever heard in my life. Absolutely terrible. But then I was researching a completely different project in the Museum of Modern Art Film Archives, and I saw a notice in the catalog about a silent film called The Passion of Joan of Arc, and it said it was one of the greatest movies of all time. And I remembered what my friend said, "Oh, Joan of Arc, so let me take a look at it." I looked at it and I couldn't believe it. It was easily one of the greatest movies I'd ever seen in my life. I'd never heard of it, didn't know anything about it, and I also knew that it was absolutely perfect for all the ideas that I had for a large piece with a religious subject. And so I immediately started to get ideas for it. Actually, by the time I got to the subway, I knew the basic ideas of how I wanted to approach it. In the early days of trying to understand how to respond to Dreyer's film, I did a lot of research and I learned that Dreyer had taken almost all the dialogue from the actual trial transcripts. And I actually read the trial transcripts and it was clear that he stole all the best lines. So I wasn't going to use the trial transcript. The question is, what else could I use? I knew almost immediately what the structure was going to be, a vocal piece because Joan heard voices, and the text would be taken from the writings of medieval female mystics from Joan of Arc's time and from before. And I realized that I could construct a libretto, a book, if you will, the lyrics of the piece based on all these other writings. Another thing I did as part of my research was I felt it was very important to get as close to Joan as I possibly could. And that meant that I needed to travel to France and see as many of the Joan of Arc sites as I could. The summer before I started to compose, I went all around. I went to her hometown of Domremy, to Rouen, where she died, to Orléans, where she fought her biggest battle, and went to other Joan of Arc sites as well. I met with various scholars and saw Joan of Arc's house. And next to Joan of Arc's house is the church where she used to pray, which is still standing. And I had taken along a recorder and I recorded the sound of the church bells from that church. Joan, it turns out, was obsessed with bells. She loved the sound of bells. And in fact, the bells would trigger her voices. So I thought it was very important to have a bell sound in Voices of Light. And the best bell sound I could think of was the sound from her church. So when you hear the bell, which rings out at several points during the score, at important points in the movie, as well as the score, that's the sound of the bell from Joan of Arc's church itself. I love Falconetti's performance. It just is astonishing. Having said that, I should make it clear that as I worked on this project, Dreyer's Joan and Falconetti's Joan, as great as they are, is not the Joan that I was imagining in my head. The Joan that I was seeing was a very, very, very astute person who was no victim at all. And to some extent, Dreyer portrays a victim, a helpless victim, and Falconetti embodies that in many ways. Not completely, but to a great extent. The Joan that I imagined was somebody who was tough as nails, who was certainly being victimized and was doing everything within her considerable power to prevent it from happening. If you read the trial transcripts, she's constantly working the people around her, trying to negotiate her way through what she knows is a death sentence. And this Joan is the Joan that clearly could have led armies into battle and clearly could have convinced a very insecure prince that a 16-year-old woman could lead an army into battle and win. This is an amazing human being. But again, even when you look at Joan like that, even when you have that response to her, she will trip you up. She doesn't fit into any category. A film score, even the most subtle kind of film score, essentially underscores, if you will, the action. It tries to make clear the emotional meaning of the film. And what I was interested in doing was not so much in clarifying the emotions in the film and the linearity of the film, all of which are crystal clear to me. I was interested in going deeper and going down rather than simply responding to what I saw. I wanted to add emotions and I wanted to add depth and nuance and ambiguity to the experience of seeing it. On the other hand, I also wanted to do something that was sincere and honest to the film itself, that didn't contradict the film and certainly didn't contradict Joan's life. One of the things that I was trying to do was to evoke medieval music. But I didn't want to write medieval music. What I wanted was a kind of a musical texture that floated outside of time, the way Joan of Arc's story, for me, floats outside of time. The way in which medieval music is constructed, some of it, particularly at the time of Joan of Arc, was in layers. You had a first layer, which was Gregorian chant, which was slowed down the way now we slow down samples to create rap music and other things. Back then, they would just simply slow down medieval chant, so instead of lasting a minute, it would last 15 minutes. And then on top of that, they would build different musical lines with different texts. So you'd sometimes have 3 or 4 texts going on simultaneously, all on top of a Gregorian chant. And that's actually the way I approached this particular project. The score works for me on many levels, and probably the clearest example of one of the techniques that I was using in approaching this project was the torture scene. The torture scene, if you look at it, is really, really horrific. There's a lot in that particular scene that Dreyer was doing. Among other things, he was referencing certain Russian silent films that were abstract in some of the close-ups. But mostly, for the most part, what you see is a woman being threatened by the instruments of torture to the point where she passes out and faints and falls ill. That's one way of looking at torture. But in the Middle Ages, among monastics and mystics, pain was used as a way of getting closer to God. Pain had a different connotation, and pain also had, to a great extent, a sadoerotic connotation for many, many people. I thought, well, now that's an interesting thing. That kind of contradicts a lot of the straightforward narrative of Dreyer's film. It kind of deepens it, because now you suddenly realize another thing that was going on. They were using torture, and apparently this is true in the Inquisition. They were using torture not only to extract confessions, but also to bring the heretic back to God. They were both sincere about that and cynical about that, I think, at the same time. One of the other sync points that was important for me was when Joan dies. The moment when she dies, she falls over and she says, "Jesus." And then she dies. That's her last words, which is true, by the way. That's what she actually said. And for me, it was very important that at that moment, the chorus sing very softly, "Jahan, Joan, Joan," making the direct correlation, the same correlation that Dreyer did in his title, between the Passion of Joan of Arc and the Passion of Jesus. Joan dying is Jesus at that moment. This movie really, really touched me very deeply. We get our masterpieces typically spoon-fed to us. We know that they're masterpieces. We've been told that. We read that Beethoven was a genius. We read that Hitchcock was a genius. But very rarely do we encounter something at that level completely by sheer accident. And that was the experience I had. It was overwhelming. And I hope everybody has that kind of experience sometime in their life with something, with some work of art, because it's unforgettable.